When I was a young girl, so really only a few years ago, yeah, rub it in. I used to be scared of everything. So I wasn't the kid that liked the water. I didn't like going fast. I wasn't a fan of heights. I wasn't into any of those things, you know, you'd expect from the kid who went on to sail around the world. I first started sailing when I was 8 years old, and it wasn't until I was 11 that I first got this idea. I never imagined myself as an adventurer or much of a sailor until Mum read me Jesse Martin's book, the previous circumnavigator, the previous record holder. And all of a sudden it put this sort of idea in my head that, wow, he's just this ordinary guy who did this really quite incredible thing, and maybe you could too. I went and told Mum and Dad, who sort of took me fairly seriously, but desperately wanted to believe that I'd get over it and move on to something else. And nothing really started happening till another Australian adventurer, Don McIntyre, who I suppose a lot of people know here, one of those guys with the beards, old adventurers. Sorry to anyone, shouldn't really say that. Stepped forward and offered me this boat to use for the voyage. And look, let's face it, pretty significant because it would have been pretty hard to sail around the world without a boat. As you can imagine, there was a fair bit of criticism when we first came out and announced this because, yes, sailing around the world is a big, scary and a dangerous thing to be doing. But I think you can probably see from the pictures here that we did have an amazing amount of support as well as that criticism. So this is the start line, Sydney Harbour. From the start line, it was up through the Pacific here, up to an island in the Northern Hemisphere, and the Line Island group rounded that and headed south again. Here we are, coming down to Cape Horn. It was really, all it was a lump of rock in the ocean. It's not a lot to get excited about, you'd think, but I was incredibly, incredibly excited. That bit of rock was just amazing. I hadn't seen land for so long. It was actually further north and into the Atlantic Ocean we struck some really nasty weather. So we had this one storm in the Atlantic Ocean where the wind came up a lot stronger, a lot faster than anyone forecast or expected. So during that night we were actually knocked down 4 times. So the boat was rolled over. I think we all know what a knockdown is here. Completely rolled over 4 times. Well, for the rest of the way across the Atlantic Ocean, down under the Cape of Good Hope, through the Indian Ocean and back towards Australia where this pitch was taken. Ever since we got into Australian waters, last leg should have been easy. It was probably the toughest leg of the whole trip. Then there was, of course, that welcome home, and to get to that finish line, the boat's closing in, the helicopter's closing in, there was all this noise. It was an amazing welcome home, up to this incredible moment where I finally got to step off and get that hug from Mum and Dad and see friends and family. I suppose it hit home to me that day particularly that you do work hard for your dreams, you can get there. The one thing I am quite proud of with the voyage is how much fun I did have out there. What made the trip special for me was obviously, yes, certainly the big days around Cape Horn, getting home, all of those things. But the best bit for me was getting up every day for 210 days and going sailing. Doesn't get much better than that.
Jessica, would you mind giving us a quick pen portrait of how the boat was rigged?
Yeah, well, the boat was just quite a simple cutter rig. The idea was to keep everything as simple as possible. The mast was basically a bit of a power pole. That mast was not going to come down. That rig was not going to fall down. I think the boat would have sunk before that rig came down. It was quite seriously overbuilt, but obviously that was the way we wanted it. I had the furling headsail, the furling Genoa, out in the bow. I obviously had a couple of them, spares. With the cutter rig, I also had a small stay sail on the inner stay, which I also used for setting the storm sail in rough conditions. The mainsail was really simple, just 3 reefs. The third reef was very, very small, so it was very, very little sail area left up with that third reef.
That was slab reef?
Just slab reefed, yeah. It was best to keep everything simple rather than turning some fancy roller reefing.
What sort of limitations did you have on fuel and how much you could carry, and when you started the motor, were you tempted to just sneak a few kilometres out?
No, you could only have enough fuel on board because it's such a small boat that putting the engine in gear, running the engine, the difference it would have made is just so insignificant that it's not actually worth it. You couldn't physically carry enough fuel to be able to make a difference that way. So no, I can't say I ever did throw it in gear to get a few extra miles out of it. It's just doesn't make the difference.
Without all the modern aids that you had, do you think it would still have been doable for you?
Certainly. I think with what we've seen from the sailors in the past is that you just deal with what you've got. I was very lucky to have these things, but of course before I did leave, I did learn to navigate by the stars. I was using HF radio, was using these other methods of communication, and and navigation, which I did get out there, and I admit I did turn the GPS on, but it was good to learn that before. And I think, I think obviously I was lucky to have these things, but I think you just deal with what you've got at the time. You get used to anything, basically.
Had you ever rolled before the trip?
No, I had never not been knocked down before the trip. We actually, I used to see around with my mates, and it sounds terrible, but we used to actually put bets on how many times I'd been knocked down before I left, and I actually got knocked down less than they all expected, so I thought that was fairly positive.
I'd just like to ask how you handled the abject loneliness.
Well, it's interesting because I don't actually use the word loneliness. Lonely is for a Friday night when you're at home and nobody's asked you out. It's quite different when you're at sea. It's your choice to be there, and incredibly I actually had a lot of people obviously following me. I had a support team behind me, and just knowing that all these people were thinking of you is actually quite incredible, and to have, I suppose, to be there by your own choice is a big thing. Certainly, yes, I got very homesick, and certainly I missed everyone, but I don't use that word lonely.
Did you ever get bored?
Look, I can honestly say I never got bored. Yes, there were definitely times when the boat just sailed itself. There wasn't a lot for me to do, for sometimes as much as weeks on end, but there was always something to do. There was always a bit of maintenance. There was keeping in touch with home. There was keeping the boat tidy, and all else failed, and I got really, really quite bored. I had to be very, very bored. I could get out some schoolwork, but it didn't happen very often. Yes. You do talk to your boat. Of course I brought a teddy bear. Very good question. Yes, I had a whole crew of stuffed teddy bears, so I wasn't really there by myself, I have to admit. I did have a whole crew full of stuffed creatures. It got a bit mouldy and smelly after a while, I have to admit.
Did you see much wildlife?
Lots of birds, certainly. Particularly I enjoyed the albatross down south, the huge, big, graceful seabirds. Surprisingly how many birds there are out there, so I used to enjoy them a lot. Lots of dolphins. I only saw one whale, sadly, and only one shark as well, but I certainly enjoyed the birds.
If you can't fish, what did you eat?
Fishing? No, I wasn't much of a fisherman, and obviously my family, my team knew this before I left, so food was a mixture of long life food, tinned food, freeze-dried food, made my own bread, powdered eggs. Surprising the menu you can come up with this. I actually quite enjoyed my food. We tested everything before I left, and you'd be surprised what is out there that you can put together. More than anything, I did have actually a lot of chocolate on board.